Officer Lisa Rodriguez had been driving her patrol car for 3 hours that Tuesday evening when she noticed something unusual ahead. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Traffic on Highway 84 was lighter than usual for this time of day. Most people were probably home having dinner with their families by now. As she drove along her regular route, Lisa spotted a black sedan about 200 yards ahead. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong, but something caught her attention. The car was moving in a strange way. It would drift slightly to the left, then jerk back to the right. Then it would happen again. Lisa had been a police officer for 5 years now. In that time, she had made hundreds of traffic stops. She could spot the signs of trouble from far away. This driver was either texting while driving, falling asleep at the wheel, or maybe had been drinking. Whatever it was, it needed to stop before someone got hurt. She pressed the accelerator and began to close the distance between her patrol car and the sedan. As she got closer, she could see the car more clearly. It was a newer model, probably less than 3 years old. The windows were tinted but not dark enough to be illegal. The license plate looked clean and properly displayed. The car drifted again, this time crossing the yellow line into the oncoming traffic lane for just a moment before correcting itself. That was enough for Lisa. She reached over and flipped on her emergency lights. The red and blue flashes reflected off the sedan's rear window as she moved in behind the vehicle. For a moment, nothing happened. The sedan continued driving at the same speed, still weaving slightly. Lisa wondered if the driver had even noticed her lights. She gave a quick blast of her siren. That got attention. The sedan's brake lights came on, and it began to slow down. Lisa watched as the driver looked for a safe place to pull over. The shoulder of the highway was wide enough here, with plenty of room for both vehicles. The sedan moved to the right and came to a complete stop. Lisa pulled in behind it, leaving enough distance between the cars for safety. Before getting out of her patrol car, Lisa took a moment to observe the situation. This was standard procedure. She looked at the sedan to see if there were any passengers. From what she could tell, there was only one person inside, the driver. She couldn't see any movement that suggested someone was trying to hide anything or acting suspicious. Lisa radioed her location to dispatch. Unit 47 making a traffic stop on Highway 84, mile marker 15. The dispatcher acknowledged her call. This was routine, but it was important. If something went wrong, other officers would know exactly where to find her. She checked her equipment one more time. Her radio was working properly. Her badge was clearly visible on her uniform. Everything was as it should be. Lisa took a deep breath and opened her car door. The evening air was cool and pleasant. She could hear the distant sound of traffic from the other direction, but this stretch of highway was quiet. Lisa walked toward the sedan at a steady pace, keeping her eyes on the vehicle and staying alert for any signs of trouble. As she approached the driver's side of the car, Lisa could see the silhouette of a man behind the wheel. He appeared to be alone, which matched her observation from the patrol car. The driver seemed to be looking for something, probably his license and registration. This was normal behavior during a traffic stop. Lisa stopped about 3 feet from the car and tapped gently on the window. The driver looked up at her and began to roll down the window. As the glass lowered, Lisa got her first clear look at the man inside the car. He appeared to be in his early 30s with dark brown hair that was neatly styled. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and seemed calm, not nervous or agitated like some drivers got during traffic stops. His hands were visible on the steering wheel, which was exactly what Lisa liked to see. "Good evening," Lisa said in a professional but friendly tone. "I'm Officer Rodriguez with the state police. I stopped you because I noticed your vehicle weaving between lanes. Are you having any trouble staying focused on driving tonight?" The man looked directly at her and shook his head. "No, officer. I was just reaching for my phone to check a text message. I know I shouldn't have done that while driving. I'm sorry." His explanation made sense. Lisa had seen this hundreds of times before. People thought they could quickly check their phones while driving, not realizing how dangerous it was. At least he was being honest about it instead of making up some excuse. "I understand," Lisa replied. But as you know, using your phone while driving is dangerous for you and other drivers on the road. Can I see your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance, please? Of course, the man said. He reached toward the glove compartment to get his registration and insurance papers. This movement required him to lean across the car, and as he did, his right arm became clearly visible to Lisa. That's when she saw it. Lisa had seen thousands of tattoos during her time as a police officer. People had them on their arms, necks, hands, and everywhere else imaginable. Most of the time, she barely noticed them. They were just part of how people chose to express themselves. But this tattoo was different. This one made her stomach drop and her heart start beating faster. On the man's forearm was a detailed tattoo of a phoenix. The mythical bird was rising from flames, its wings spread wide. The artwork was intricate and colorful, with bright reds, oranges and yellows making up the fire, and deep blues and purples in the phoenix's feathers. Lisa tried to keep her expression neutral, but inside, her mind was racing. She had seen this exact tattoo before. Not one like it, but this specific design with these exact details. The problem was she had seen it in a police report from a case that had never been solved. 3 years ago, Lisa had responded to a call about a break-in at a house on the other side of town. An elderly couple had been hurt during the incident, and they had given a very specific description of their attacker. The detail they remembered most clearly was his tattoo. A phoenix rising from flames, exactly like the one she was looking at right now. The man was still looking through his glove compartment, unaware that Lisa had gone completely still. Her training told her to stay calm and professional, but every instinct she had was telling her that she might be looking at someone who had committed a serious crime. Lisa forced herself to breathe normally and maintain her professional demeanor. She couldn't let on that anything was wrong, not yet. She needed to handle this situation carefully and by the book. If this was really the person from that unsolved case, she couldn't afford to make any mistakes that might let him get away again. Lisa's mind was spinning as she stood there next to the car. The man was still searching through his glove compartment, completely unaware of what was happening. She could hear him shuffling through papers, probably looking for his insurance card. "Sorry, officer," he said without looking up. "I know it's in here somewhere. I just renewed my insurance last month." Lisa nodded, trying to appear normal even though her heart was pounding. She needed to get a better look at that tattoo to be absolutely sure. The lighting wasn't perfect here on the side of the highway, but what she had seen so far matched her memory exactly. 3 years ago seemed like yesterday when she thought about that case. Lisa had been working the night shift when the call came in. An elderly couple named the Kellermans had been victims of a home invasion. The incident had shaken the entire community because crimes like that were rare in their small town. When Lisa arrived at the house that night, she found Mr. and Mrs. Kellerman sitting in their living room, both of them visibly shaken. Mrs. Kellerman had a bruise on her cheek, and Mr. Kellerman's glasses were broken. The house was a mess, with drawers pulled out and items scattered across the floor. The Kellermans told Lisa that a man had broken into their home around 10 o'clock that evening. They described him as being in his late 20s or early 30s, with dark hair and average height. But the detail that stood out most was his tattoo. Mrs. Kellerman had gotten a clear look at it when the intruder reached across a table to grab some jewelry. "It was a bird," Mrs. Kellerman had said, her voice still shaking from fear. "A beautiful bird with big wings rising up from fire. The colors were so bright, reds and yellows and blues. I'll never forget it." Mr. Kellerman had nodded in agreement. The artwork was very detailed. It wasn't some simple design. Someone had spent a lot of money on that tattoo. Lisa had written down every word of their description. She had even asked them to describe the tattoo again the next day, when they were calmer and could think more clearly. Their description never changed. They were certain about what they had seen. The case had been assigned to Detective Thompson, who had worked on it for months. They had checked with local tattoo shops, hoping to find the artist who had created such a distinctive design. They had looked through databases of known criminals with tattoos. They had followed up on every lead that came in, but nothing had worked. The case eventually went cold, joining the stack of unsolved files that every police department, unfortunately, had to maintain. Lisa had always felt bad about that. The Kellermans were good people who didn't deserve what had happened to them. Now standing here on Highway 84, Lisa was looking at what appeared to be the exact same tattoo. "Here we go," the young man said, finally finding his insurance card. He handed it to Lisa along with his driver's license and registration. "Sorry about that delay." Lisa took the documents, being careful to get another look at his arm as he handed them to her. The tattoo was definitely a phoenix, and the more she looked at it, the more certain she became that this was the same design the Kellermans had described. She looked down at the driver's license. The name on it was David Chen. According to the license, he was 32 years old and lived in Riverside, which was about 30 miles from where the Kellermans lived. The photo on the license matched the man in the car. "Mr. Chen," Lisa said, "I notice you live in Riverside. What brings you to this area tonight?" David looked up at her with a slight smile. "I was visiting a friend who lives about 10 miles up the road. We had dinner and watched a movie. I'm heading home now." His answer seemed reasonable enough. Lisa nodded and pretended to examine his documents more carefully. What she was really doing was thinking through her options. She couldn't arrest someone based only on a tattoo, no matter how distinctive it was. She needed to be smart about this. "Mr. Chen, have you ever lived anywhere else besides Riverside?" Lisa asked, trying to sound casual. "I moved there about 4 years ago," David replied. "Before that, I lived in various places around the state. I moved around a lot for work." 4 years ago. That would have put his move to Riverside right around the time of the break-in. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. The timing was suspicious, but it still wasn't proof of anything. She handed his documents back to him, making sure to get one more close look at the tattoo. Now she was certain. The phoenix had the same wing spread, the same flame pattern, and the same color scheme that the Kellermans had described. Even the size and placement on his forearm matched their description. "Mr. Chen, I'm going to give you a warning for distracted driving tonight," Lisa said. "Please remember that using your phone while driving puts you and others at risk. Keep your eyes on the road and your hands on the wheel." "Thank you, officer," David said, seeming relieved. "I really appreciate that. I'll definitely be more careful." Lisa stepped back from the car as David rolled up his window and prepared to drive away. She watched as he pulled back onto the highway and disappeared into the evening traffic. Only, when his taillights were completely out of sight, did she allow herself to really think about what had just happened. She walked back to her patrol car and sat down behind the wheel. Her hands were actually shaking slightly as she reached for her radio. Lisa had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. This was the possibility of solving a case that had been haunting her for 3 years. But she also knew she had to be careful. Just because someone had a tattoo that matched a description didn't mean they were guilty of a crime. There could be other explanations. Maybe multiple people had gotten similar tattoos from the same artist. Maybe the Kellermans' memory wasn't as accurate as they thought. Maybe this was all just a coincidence. Still, Lisa knew she couldn't ignore what she had seen. She owed it to the Kellermans, and to the community, to follow up on this lead. Even if it turned out to be nothing, she had to investigate. She picked up her radio and called dispatch. "Unit 47 to dispatch." "Go ahead, 47. I need to speak with Detective Thompson as soon as possible. It's regarding an old case." "Copy." "That 47. I'll have him call you." Lisa put down the radio and started driving back toward the police station. Her mind was already working through everything she needed to do. She would need to pull the old case file and review all the details. She would need to document exactly what she had observed tonight. She would need to find out more about David Chen and where he had been living 3 years ago. Most importantly, she would need to be absolutely certain before taking any further action. The last thing she wanted was to ruin an innocent person's life based on a misunderstanding. But as Lisa drove through the quiet streets of her town, she couldn't shake the feeling that this traffic stop had been more than just routine. Something told her that after 3 long years, the Kellermans might finally get the justice they deserved. Lisa arrived at the police station just as Detective Thompson was pulling into the parking lot. She had called him on her way back, and he had agreed to meet her right away. Detective Thompson was known for his dedication to solving cases, especially the ones that had gone cold. If anyone would take her discovery seriously, it would be him. "Rodriguez," Detective Thompson called out as they both got out of their cars. "You sounded pretty excited on the phone. What's this about?" Lisa took a deep breath. Now that she was about to explain what had happened, she wondered if it would sound as significant to someone else as it did to her. "It's about the Kellerman case from 3 years ago. I think I might have found our suspect." Detective Thompson's eyebrows went up. "The home invasion? Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Lisa replied. "I just made a traffic stop, and the driver had a tattoo that matched the description the Kellermans gave us exactly. Exactly, Detective. Every detail they described." They walked into the station together, and Detective Thompson led the way to his desk. The police station was quiet at this time of evening, with only a few officers working the night shift. Lisa was grateful for the privacy. She wanted to go through everything carefully before word got out that they might have a break in the case. "Tell me everything," Detective Thompson said as he sat down at his desk. "Start from the beginning." Lisa pulled up a chair and began to recount the entire traffic stop. She described how she had noticed David Chen's erratic driving, how the stop had proceeded normally at first, and then how she had seen the tattoo when he reached for his registration. "The Phoenix was exactly like Mrs. Kellerman described," Lisa explained. "Same size, same placement on the forearm, same color pattern. The wings were spread wide, and the flames underneath had the same red and yellow design she talked about." Detective Thompson was taking notes as she spoke. "What was his name again?" "David Chen. 32 years old, lives in Riverside. According to his license, he's been there for about 4 years. 4 years," Detective Thompson repeated thoughtfully. "So he would have moved there right around the time of the break-in." Lisa nodded. "That's what I was thinking too. The timing seems suspicious." Detective Thompson stood up and walked over to a filing cabinet. "Let me pull the Kellerman file. I want to compare your description of this tattoo with what we have on record." While he searched for the file, Lisa thought about David Chen's behavior during the traffic stop. He had seemed calm and cooperative, not nervous or suspicious. But that didn't necessarily mean anything. 3 years was a long time. If he was guilty, he might have convinced himself that he would never be caught. "Here it is," Detective Thompson said, returning to his desk with a thick folder. He opened it and began flipping through the pages. "Mrs. Kellerman's statement. Here we go." He read from the report silently for a moment, then looked up at Lisa. "Listen to this. The suspect had a large tattoo on his right forearm depicting a phoenix rising from flames. The bird's wings were spread wide, approximately 4 inches, from tip to tip. The flames were primarily red and yellow with some orange. The phoenix itself had blue and purple feathers with some black detailing around the edges." Lisa felt goosebumps on her arms. "That's exactly what I saw, down to the colors and the size." Detective Thompson continued reading. She also said, "The tattoo appeared to be professional work, very detailed and colorful. It was definitely not a simple or cheap design." "The one I saw tonight was definitely professional," Lisa confirmed. "High-quality artwork, probably cost several $100s to get done." Detective Thompson closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "This is either an incredible coincidence or we've just caught a very lucky break." Lisa had been thinking the same thing. "What do we do now?" "First, we need to find out everything we can about David Chen," Detective Thompson said. "I want to know where he lived 3 years ago, what he was doing for work, whether he has any criminal history. We need to build a timeline of his life." He turned to his computer and began typing. "Let's start with a basic background check." While Detective Thompson worked on the computer, Lisa reviewed the case file more thoroughly. She read through all the witness statements and crime scene reports, refreshing her memory of the details. The Kellermans had been awakened by the sound of breaking glass around 10 o'clock at night. The intruder had entered through a window in their kitchen. According to their statements, the man had demanded money and jewelry. When Mr. Kellerman told him they didn't keep much cash in the house, the intruder had become angry and pushed Mrs. Kellerman, causing her to fall and hit her cheek on a table. He had then ransacked several rooms, taking about $800 in cash, some jewelry, and a few small electronics. The whole incident had lasted less than 15 minutes, but it had left the elderly couple traumatized. They had been afraid to stay in their house for weeks afterward, eventually installing a security system and new locks on all their doors and windows. Interesting, Detective Thompson said from his computer. David Chen has no criminal record, not even a speeding ticket, but look at this, 3 years ago he was living in Millbrook. Lisa looked up from the file. Millbrook was only about 5 miles from where the Kellermans lived. That puts him right in the area. Gets better, Detective Thompson continued. According to his employment records, he was working for a landscaping company at that time. Guess what kind of houses they serviced? Upscale neighborhoods? Exactly, including the neighborhood where the Kellermans live. Detective Thompson turned his computer screen so Lisa could see it. The company he worked for, Green Thumb Landscaping, had several clients on Maple Street. The Kellermans live on Maple Street. Lisa felt her pulse quicken. So he would have known the area. He might have even worked on their property or seen their house during the day. That's what I'm thinking, Detective Thompson agreed. A landscaper would know which houses looked like they might have valuables inside. He would also know the best times to approach houses when the owners might be home alone. They spent the next hour going through David Chen's background more thoroughly. They found that he had moved to Riverside about 6 months after the break-in occurred. He had left his job with the landscaping company around the same time, claiming he wanted to get into warehouse work instead. People change jobs all the time, Detective Thompson noted, but the timing is interesting. He leaves town right after a major crime occurs in an area where he was working. Lisa was starting to feel more confident that they were on the right track. What's our next step? Detective Thompson thought for a moment. We need more evidence before we can make any arrests. The tattoo is a good start, but we need something concrete that puts him at the scene of the crime. What about security cameras? Lisa suggested. Maybe some of the neighbors had cameras that caught something. We checked that 3 years ago, but most of the footage was already deleted by the time we got to it. The Kellermans didn't have any cameras themselves back then. Detective Thompson closed the file and looked at Lisa. Here's what I want to do. Tomorrow morning I'm going to drive out to Riverside and do some surveillance on Mr. Chen. I want to see what his routine is, where he works now, who he associates with. We need to learn everything we can about him. What about the Kellermans? Lisa asked. Should we show them his photo? Not yet, Detective Thompson replied. I don't want to get their hopes up until we're more certain. But if we can gather enough evidence to bring him in for questioning, then yes, we'll definitely want them to see if they can identify him. Lisa understood the caution. The Kellermans had been through enough without having to deal with false hope or disappointment. I want you to write up a detailed report of tonight's traffic stop, Detective Thompson continued. Include everything you remember about the tattoo, his behavior, what he said about visiting a friend. Document it all while it's still fresh in your memory. I'll have it done before my shift ends, Lisa promised. As they prepared to leave the station, Detective Thompson turned to Lisa one more time. Good work tonight, Rodriguez. Your attention to detail might have just cracked a case that's been cold for 3 years. Lisa felt a mix of pride and nervousness. She was proud that her observational skills had potentially led to a breakthrough, but she was also nervous about what would happen next. If David Chen was innocent, they needed to be very careful not to ruin his life. But if he was guilty, she wanted to make sure they built a strong enough case to ensure justice for the Kellermans. As she drove home that night, Lisa couldn't stop thinking about the tattoo. The image was burned into her memory now, just like it had been burned into Mrs. Kellerman's memory 3 years ago. Sometimes the smallest details could lead to the biggest discoveries. Tomorrow would tell them whether this was one of those times. The next morning, Detective Thompson was sitting in his unmarked car outside a warehouse complex in Riverside by 7 o'clock. He had spent the early hours researching David Chen's current employment and had discovered that he worked as a supervisor at Riverside Distribution Center. The facility handled packages for several major shipping companies. Thompson positioned his car where he could see the employee parking lot, without being obvious about it. He had David's license plate number and a description of his vehicle from the night before. Now it was just a matter of waiting and observing. At 7:45, the black sedan pulled into the parking lot. Thompson watched as David got out of his car and walked toward the warehouse entrance. He was wearing jeans and a company polo shirt, carrying a lunch bag and a cup of coffee. To anyone watching, he looked like a completely normal working person starting another ordinary day. Thompson made notes about David's arrival time and behavior, then settled in for what might be a long day of surveillance. He wanted to establish David's routine and see if anything seemed unusual or suspicious about his daily activities. While Thompson was conducting surveillance, Lisa was back at the police station following up on other aspects of the case. She had arrived early and was going through old evidence files, looking for anything that might have been missed during the original investigation. Detective Thompson had asked her to research similar crimes in the area around the time of the Kellerman break-in. Sometimes criminals committed multiple offenses before moving to a new location, and if David Chen was their suspect, he might have been involved in other incidents. Lisa spent hours going through police reports from neighboring towns and counties. She was looking for any crimes that involved suspects with distinctive tattoos, particularly Phoenix designs. She also searched for break-ins that had similar patterns to the Kellerman case. Around noon, she found something interesting. 2 months before the Kellerman incident, there had been a burglary in the next town over. The victims were an elderly man who lived alone. The suspect had entered through a window and had taken cash and jewelry, just like in the Kellerman case. The victim, Mr. Patterson, had given a description of the burglar that was similar to what the Kellermans had provided. However, Mr. Patterson hadn't mentioned seeing any tattoos. Lisa made a note to contact him and see if he could provide any additional details. Around 2 o'clock, Detective Thompson called Lisa from his surveillance location. Chen just left the warehouse for lunch, he reported. He drove to a sandwich shop about 2 miles away. Nothing unusual so far, but I want to keep watching. I found something that might be related, Lisa told him about the Patterson burglary. The victim description and the crime pattern are very similar. Good work, Thompson replied. After I finish the surveillance today, let's contact Mr. Patterson and see what he remembers. That evening, Detective Thompson and Lisa drove to Mr. Patterson's house. He was a retired teacher in his 70s who lived in a modest home about 15 miles from where the Kellermans lived. When they explained why they were there, Mr. Patterson was eager to help. I've been hoping someone would catch the person who did this, Mr. Patterson said as he invited them into his living room. It happened over 3 years ago, but I still think about it sometimes. Detective Thompson showed him a photo of David Chen that they had obtained from his driver's license records. Do you recognize this man? Mr. Patterson studied the photo carefully, holding it at different angles and distances. After several minutes, he shook his head. I'm not certain. The person who broke into my house was wearing a dark baseball cap, and it was nighttime. I didn't get as good a look at his face as I would have liked. What about tattoos? Lisa asked. Did you notice if the intruder had any tattoos on his arms? Mr. Patterson thought for a moment. You know, he was wearing a long-sleeved shirt, so I couldn't see his arms very well. But when he reached for some items on my dresser, his sleeve pulled up a little bit. I remember seeing something colorful on his forearm, but I couldn't make out what it was. Lisa and Detective Thompson exchanged glances. This was another piece that seemed to fit the puzzle. Can you describe anything else about what you saw on his arm? Detective Thompson asked. It was definitely a tattoo, Mr. Patterson replied. I could see bright colors, reds and yellows, I think. But the lighting wasn't very good and it was only visible for a few seconds. They spent another 30 minutes with Mr. Patterson, going over every detail he could remember about the break-in. The crime had happened around 9:30 at night, which was close to the timing of the Kellerman incident. The intruder had been in the house for about 10 minutes and had taken approximately $400 in cash and some jewelry. As they drove back to the station, Lisa felt like the pieces were starting to come together. 2 similar crimes, both in areas where David Chen was working as a landscaper, both involving elderly victims and the same types of stolen items. And both victims remember seeing something that could have been a phoenix tattoo, Detective Thompson added. It's still not enough for an arrest, but we're building a solid foundation. The next day, they decided to take a different approach. Detective Thompson contacted the owner of Green Thumb Landscaping, the company David Chen had worked for 3 years earlier. The owner, Mr. Williams, agreed to meet with them at his office. "I remember David," Mr. Williams said when they showed him the photo. "He was a good worker, very reliable. He worked for me for about 2 years before he decided to change careers." "Did he ever work in the Maple Street area?" Lisa asked. Mr. Williams pulled out some old work schedules and client lists. "Yes, we had several clients on Maple Street. David worked on most of those properties at one time or another." "Do you remember if he ever worked at 432 Maple Street?" Detective Thompson asked. That was the Kellerman's address. Mr. Williams checked his records more carefully. "Actually, yes. We did some seasonal cleanup work there in the fall, about 4 months before David left the company. I believe David was part of that crew." Lisa felt her heart rate increase. This meant David Chen had been on the Kellerman's property and would have had the opportunity to observe their house, their routines, and their security measures. "Was there anything unusual about David's behavior around the time he left your company?" Detective Thompson asked. Mr. Williams thought for a moment. "Not really unusual, but I do remember that he seemed to have more money than usual toward the end. He bought a newer car and started talking about moving to a better apartment. I assumed he had gotten a second job or something." After leaving the landscaping company, Lisa and Detective Thompson drove by the Kellerman's house. They wanted to see the property from the perspective of someone who might have been planning a crime. The house sat on a large lot with mature trees and bushes that provided plenty of cover. From the street, it was clear that this was a well-maintained property in an affluent neighborhood. Someone doing landscaping work there would have had ample opportunity to observe the residents' habits and identify potential entry points. If someone was planning a break-in, this would be an ideal target, Detective Thompson observed. Big house, elderly residents, lots of hiding places in the yard. They also drove by Mr. Patterson's house, which had similar characteristics. Both properties were in quiet neighborhoods where a landscaper's truck wouldn't look out of place during normal business hours. That afternoon, they decided it was time to contact the Kellermans. Detective Thompson called them and explained that they had a potential lead in their case, but he was careful not to give them too much detail or get their hopes up too high. "We'd like you to look at a photograph and tell us if you recognize the person," Detective Thompson explained. "This is just one part of our investigation, so please don't feel any pressure to identify someone if you're not absolutely certain." The Kellermans agreed to meet them at the police station the next morning. Lisa was nervous about this meeting. She knew how much this case meant to the elderly couple, and she didn't want to disappoint them if the identification didn't work out. But she also knew that they were building a strong case against David Chen. The tattoo, the timing of his move, his access to both crime scenes through his landscaping work, and his apparent sudden increase in income all pointed toward his involvement in these crimes. As Lisa finished her shift that day, she realized that what had started as a routine traffic stop was turning into one of the most significant cases of her career. If they could prove that David Chen was responsible for these break-ins, they would not only solve a cold case but also bring closure to victims who had been waiting for justice for 3 long years. The next morning would be crucial. If the Kellermans could identify David Chen, they would have enough evidence to bring him in for questioning, and once they had him in an interview room, Detective Thompson's experience and skill might be able to get the confession they needed to close this case once and for all. The next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Kellerman arrived at the police station at exactly 10 o'clock. Lisa watched them walk through the front door, noting how much older they seemed than when she had first met them 3 years ago. The crime had clearly taken a toll on both of them, but they still carried themselves with dignity and determination. Detective Thompson greeted them warmly and led them to a quiet conference room. Lisa joined them, bringing a folder that contained several photographs, including the one of David Chen. The process of showing photos to witnesses had to be done carefully to avoid any suggestion or bias. "Before we begin," Detective Thompson explained, "I want you both to understand that this is just part of our investigation. If you don't recognize anyone in these photos, that's perfectly fine. We only want you to identify someone if you're absolutely certain it's the person who broke into your home." Mrs. Kellerman nodded nervously. "We understand. We've been hoping for this day for 3 years." Detective Thompson placed 6 photographs on the table in front of them. David Chen's photo was mixed in with 5 others of men who were similar in age and appearance. This was standard procedure to ensure that any identification would be reliable in court. Both Mr. and Mrs. Kellerman studied the photos carefully. They picked up each one, examined it closely, and discussed what they remembered about their attacker. Lisa held her breath as she watched them deliberate. After about 5 minutes, Mrs. Kellerman pointed to David Chen's photograph. "This is him," she said with certainty. "This is the man who broke into our house." Mr. Kellerman leaned over to look at the photo she had selected. He studied it for another minute, then nodded in agreement. "Yes, I believe she's right. The face looks very familiar. Are you both certain?" Detective Thompson asked. "Take as much time as you need." Mrs. Kellerman looked at the photo again. "I'm certain. I've seen this face in my nightmares for 3 years. I'll never forget it." Lisa felt a wave of relief and excitement. This identification, combined with all the other evidence they had gathered, would be enough to obtain an arrest warrant for David Chen. After the Kellermans left the station, Detective Thompson immediately began preparing the paperwork for the warrant. He compiled all their evidence: the tattoo identification, David's access to both crime scenes through his landscaping work, the timing of his move to Riverside, his sudden apparent increase in income, and now the positive identification by both victims. "Judge Harrison is reviewing the warrant application now," Detective Thompson told Lisa. "If everything goes well, we should have approval within a few hours." While they waited, Lisa couldn't help but think about how dramatically things had changed since her routine traffic stop just 3 days earlier. She had been doing her job exactly as she had hundreds of times before, but this time, paying attention to details had led to something much bigger than a simple citation. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Judge Harrison approved the arrest warrant. Detective Thompson assembled a team of officers to make the arrest. They decided to wait until David Chen's shift ended at the warehouse, then approach him in the parking lot where there would be fewer people around. Lisa was part of the arrest team, which felt fitting since she had been the one to identify David in the first place. As they drove to Riverside, she felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. This was the moment when all their investigation work would either pay off or fall apart. They arrived at the warehouse complex at 4:30 in the afternoon and positioned themselves around the employee parking lot. At exactly 5 o'clock, workers began coming out of the building. Lisa spotted David Chen walking toward his car, carrying the same lunch bag she had seen him with during the surveillance. Detective Thompson approached David as he reached his vehicle. "David Chen, I'm Detective Thompson with the state police. I have a warrant for your arrest." David looked genuinely surprised and confused. "Arrest for what? I haven't done anything wrong." "You're being charged with breaking and entering, theft, and assault in connection with incidents that occurred 3 years ago," Detective Thompson explained as he handcuffed David. "You have the right to remain silent." As Detective Thompson read David his rights, Lisa watched his face carefully. He seemed shocked by the arrest, but she couldn't tell if his surprise was genuine or if he was just a good actor. David was transported to the police station and placed in an interview room. Detective Thompson decided to let him sit there for a while to think about his situation before beginning the formal questioning. This was a common tactic that sometimes led suspects to become more cooperative. 2 hours later, Detective Thompson and Lisa entered the interview room. David had clearly been thinking during his time alone, and he looked much more worried than he had during the arrest. "David, we need to talk about some incidents that happened 3 years ago," Detective Thompson began. "Specifically, break-ins at the homes of Mr. Patterson and Mr. and Mrs. Kellerman." David's face went pale when Detective Thompson mentioned the specific names. I don't know what you're talking about. Both victims have identified you from photographs, Lisa said. They also remember your distinctive tattoo very clearly. David instinctively looked down at his arm, even though his tattoo was covered by his shirt sleeve. That small reaction told Lisa that he knew exactly why they were questioning him. Detective Thompson spent the next hour methodically going through all the evidence they had collected. He explained how David's landscaping work had given him access to both properties. He showed David the timeline that connected his departure from the area with the dates of the crimes. He described how the victims had identified both his face and his tattoo. David, we have you at both scenes, Detective Thompson said finally. We have positive identifications from the victims. We have evidence that you had access to both properties through your work. The evidence is overwhelming. David sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the table. Lisa could see that he was struggling with whether to continue denying everything or to admit his involvement. Finally, David looked up at Detective Thompson. If I tell you what happened, what kind of deal can I get? That's something you'll need to discuss with a lawyer and the prosecutor, Detective Thompson replied. But I can tell you that cooperation is always looked upon favorably by the courts. David asked for a lawyer, and the formal interview ended there. But Lisa could tell from his reaction that they had the right person. An innocent person would have continued to protest their innocence, not ask about making a deal. Over the next few days, David's lawyer worked with the prosecutor's office to arrange a plea agreement. In exchange for his confession and guilty plea, David would receive a lighter sentence than if he had gone to trial and been convicted. During his confession, David explained that he had been struggling with gambling debts 3 years earlier. He had gotten in over his head with some dangerous people who were demanding immediate payment. The landscaping job had given him the opportunity to identify potential targets, elderly homeowners who might keep cash and jewelry in their houses. I never meant to hurt anyone, David said during his confession. I thought the houses would be empty when I broke in. When I found people home, I panicked. I just wanted to get what I needed and leave. David was sentenced to 7 years in prison for the 2 break-ins. The judge also ordered him to pay restitution to both the Kellermans and Mr. Patterson for the items he had stolen and the emotional trauma he had caused. After the sentencing, Lisa and Detective Thompson met with the Kellermans one final time. The elderly couple expressed their gratitude for the work that had led to David's arrest and conviction. We can finally sleep peacefully in our own home again, Mrs. Kellerman said. For 3 years we've been afraid that he might come back. Now we know he can't hurt us or anyone else. Mr. Kellerman shook Lisa's hand. Thank you for noticing that tattoo and following up on it. A lot of officers might have just written the traffic ticket and moved on. Lisa felt proud of the role she had played in solving the case, but she also felt humbled by the experience. It reminded her that police work was about much more than just enforcing traffic laws or responding to emergency calls. Sometimes it was about paying attention to details and following through on hunches that might seem insignificant at first. Detective Thompson was promoted to sergeant 6 months later, partly in recognition of his work on the Kellerman case and other cold cases he had solved. Lisa was commended by the police chief and received a letter of appreciation that went into her personnel file. But for Lisa, the most meaningful reward was knowing that the Kellermans could feel safe in their home again. Every time she made a traffic stop after that, she paid even closer attention to details. She never knew when a routine encounter might lead to something much more important. The case also became a training example at the police academy, showing new officers how important it was to be observant and to follow up on anything that seemed unusual or significant. Lisa was invited to speak to academy classes about the case, sharing her experience and encouraging new officers to trust their instincts. Years later, Lisa would look back on that evening traffic stop as the moment that defined her career. It taught her that sometimes the smallest observations could lead to the biggest results, and that justice often came from the dedication to follow through on details that others might overlook. The Kellermans sent Lisa a Christmas card every year after the case was solved, always thanking her again for her careful attention to detail. It served as a constant reminder that police work was ultimately about serving and protecting people, and that sometimes a single moment of observation could change lives forever.